Today's reading comes from Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 to 20. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesar Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound on heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Our next reading is from Romans chapter 12, verses 1 to 8. "I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of yourself more highly than you ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. For as in one body we have many members, and not all the members have the same function, so we, who are many, are one body in Christ, and individually we are members one of another. We have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us: prophecy in proportion to faith, ministry in ministering, the teacher in teaching, the exhorter in exhortation, the giver in generosity, the leader in diligence, the compassionate in cheerfulness."
I had quite an interesting conversation with a new student at high school. And this girl, let's call her Jane, had come to her new school wanting to make friends. She desperately desired to fit in, and she hoped to do well. Do you remember that feeling yourself, starting a new school? Starting maybe primary school or high school, where there was that deep desire to fit in, to be part of that community. She soon discovered that doing well in a school often carries a high price. There were pressures put on her, subtle pressures, good-natured at first and all very friendly. Nevertheless, there were pressures. She was told things like, "Jane, people don't do things like that here. You know, you need to loosen up, lighten up a bit. Don't stand out from the crowd. Just go with the flow." A pressure to conform, to fit in with everyone else, to not stand out in any particular way. Jane quickly realised that she couldn't afford to just go with the flow, passively just drifting along with everyone else. She needed to think through what she wanted in life, who she wanted to be, what actions were right for her. At first, she said to me, I was scared. Nobody wants to look odd. Nobody wants to be a killjoy, a self-righteous prude. But then I finally got the courage to say to myself, this is me. This is the life that I want. It's not for everyone else, but it's for me. I'm learning the joy, Steve. I'm learning the joy of being odd. Now, what a strange thing to say. The joy of being odd. Learning the joy of being odd. For most of us, on most days, we assume that joy comes from fitting in, from having the right clothes, knowing the right people, feeling comfortable with the crowd, just fitting in. We normally don't like to stick out too much. Well, at least most of us don't, do we, Bruce? But others, it tends to be the thing they like to do. I reckon Bruce knows the joy of being odd. Don't you? Sorry, Bruce. But it's true. It's true. It can be uncomfortable, though, to stick out. This young person, though, has discovered another way, the joy of being odd. I mean, you can fit in at school by being the right kind of rebel, of being the right kind of rugged individual, but Jane wasn't afraid to be herself, and it actually came from her faith. Jane had discovered that being odd, from standing out, carried its own sort of joy, a deep joy that can help you survive those times where you suffer for being who you are, where it actually sometimes hurts to stand out from the crowd. I couldn't help but thinking, wouldn't it be incredible if all of our kids and our grandkids could discover such courage and faith to truly be themselves and realise it's absolutely okay to be odd, to stand out, to be different. But then I began to think, do we really want that? Because often I think we want them just to have a good life. And I remember being told in all sorts of ways as growing up, just go with it. Don't do well. In fact, I discovered being a C average at school was the best way to get on. Because if you got an A for anything, you were going to get beaten up. At least that's what happened in my high school. So I learnt very quickly, just get a C average. And that didn't matter how much mum or dad or anyone else who knew that you could do better said to you, why? You said nothing, and you decided to fit in and just do what you needed in order to avoid getting your head beaten in. But I think it would be far better, and we would live in a better world if we discovered and rediscovered the joy of being odd. Because if we remember in our reading today, it talked about us, what was the words? I want you to present yourself as living sacrifices to God, holy and acceptable. The whole idea about being holy is not about having wonderful wings and a glorious halo that sits over your head and just being perfect and wonderful. Holy means being completely reflective of God, of being a person who seeks and follows after God's way. And that, in our world, in our society, actually, to me, means being odd. In our world where it's so much about what we've got and who we are and who we mix with, God often calls us to a different kind of world, to take teddy bears to members of parliament, to stand up for people who find themselves on the bottom of the pile, to seek justice for all, to work for a community based on compassion and love and understanding. In our world today, that sounds a bit odd to me, doesn't it? To you? Can there be times when it actually feels like we're being a bit odd, when we call for something a bit different from the world around us, to stand out from the world around us? Jesus knew that he stood out and that he probably appeared pretty odd to the people around him. And so when he asked the disciples who people said that he was, good old Peter came up with the right answer. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Good old Peter, go to the top of the class, you get the right answer. But do you have any idea what this means? Do you know what that means? You see, the disciples hadn't even begun to recognise how odd Jesus would end up being. Jesus might have been the Messiah, but they didn't really know what that meant. The Messiah, to the Jews of Jesus' day, was the one whom God was sending, who would come and solve all their problems, would come with a great army to overthrow the Romans, to throw out the oppressors and set the people free. There was going to be this great revolution. That's what they understood the Messiah to be. But that was not the sort of Messiah that Jesus turned out to be. He didn't fight power with power. He fought the Roman power with a different way of being, a different ethic. How odd then, how odd that Jesus, immediately after accepting the title of Messiah, starts talking about terrible things like suffering and dying at the hands of the authorities. No, says Peter, that can't happen. Yes, Peter, Jesus responds, this is a Messiah who came to serve others, who came to be first by putting himself last. This is a Messiah who came not to vanquish the powers with greater powers of force, but rather a Messiah who came to submit to those powers with a power of love that cannot stay dead. That, Peter, is the Messiah you have just proclaimed. How odd. How odd. It doesn't fit with what their expectations were. This Jesus, the Messiah, is calling Peter and calling you and I to follow in his footsteps of being odd, of standing out in contrast to the powers of the world around us. So I'll ask you once again, what is it that we really dream of for our children and our grandchildren and ourselves? Is it to be holy? Is it to be odd? What exactly do we dream of for them and for ourselves? Is it the joy of being odd? The joy of standing out as God's people in this world? Or is it something much more like economic security, of fitting in, of not rocking the boat? There's something that we do every time we celebrate a baptism. There's something very odd we do every time we gather around the Lord's table. At baptism, we mark the person with the sign of the cross, saying that they are to be odd like Jesus. Every time we gather around the Lord's table, we take a bit of bread, a cup of juice, and we say that this body, this Jesus, is to become part of us, and we are to reflect that broken love with others, that we are to take those strange waters of baptism and be God's people again and again. They are odd things that we do. This gathering together and worshipping and celebrating is quite an odd thing. In our world today, it no longer is the given thing to do to go to church every Sunday. We're pretty odd when you think about it. We're a strange bunch. And why do we do it? I think it's partly because we know that there is a deep stirring within all of us that calls us to something more. Those waters of baptism did make a difference in our life. This food, this strange thing we share each time we gather around the Lord's table, stirs something deep within us and calls us to be God's people, to be odd. No matter who we are, no matter where we might find ourselves today on our journey of faith, let us celebrate that we are called to be God's odd people, called to make a difference in our world, called to take the symbols of love from this place and share it beyond, that it might make a real difference. Let us be strengthened and take resolve to be God's holy odd people. For there is nothing that can stop that power of love from making a difference in our world.